So most every day you probably type or at least see HTTP. In fact, if you're watching or listening to this over the web, you're using HTTP right now. But what is it? Well, it's what you type at the start of a URL, or at least used to. These days, browsers just assume that you want HTTP, even if you don't actually type it. More technically, though, HTTP is a protocol, a language of sorts that web browsers and web servers speak, a set of conventions to which they adhere, just like we humans have. For instance, in the US, when you first meet someone, you typically initiate a connection by extending your hand, at which point the other person responds to it by shaking it. Well, that's a protocol. In some countries or families, you initiate a connection by kissing someone on the cheek. Well, that's another protocol. So HTTP is a protocol that happens to involve computers instead of humans. And here's how it works. When a browser wants to show a human a web page, it initiates a connection to a web server by sending an HTTP request, inside of which is a message akin to, please send me this web page. In reality, it's something more cryptic like get/http/1.1. But when the server receives that request, it sends an HTTP response, inside of which is the web page. Now that web page, meanwhile, is written in a language called HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, and that's where HTTP gets its own name. HTTP is an acronym for Hypertext Transfer Protocol because what it's transferring from server to browser is hypertext markup language. In a sense, the web is a bit like a restaurant where you're the customer or the client. Much like you order food in a restaurant from a waiter or waitress who then brings it to your table, so do web browsers order files from a web server who then returns with the same. In fact, it's for this very reason that browsers are often called clients and servers are called, well, servers. The relationship is very much the same. Make sense? All right, well, let's take a look at an actual HTTP request and response. First, let's open a browser. I happen to be using Chrome, but you can do this in most any browser these days. Let's next select View, Developer, Developer Tools, which will open a developer panel at the bottom of our window. And let's next click that panel's Network tab. The next time I load a web page from a server, we'll see in this tab all of the HTTP traffic between Chrome and the server. Okay, let's visit, say, Google. http://www.google.com/enter. Okay, what just happened? Well, first let's scroll to the very top of the tab. The very first row represents Google's HTTP response to my HTTP request. Well, let's click that row. To the right, we now see a preview of the HTML that was included in that response, along with a whole bunch of JavaScript, but more on those another time. Let's now click the Headers tab to the left of this preview tab, and here's where we can see the actual HTTP request that my browser sent and the actual HTTP response that Google returned. As for the server's response, let's click View Source next to Response Headers. Here's what Google sent to my browser. The first line is perhaps the most interesting. http://1.1/200 OK. This means all is well and the home page was transferred successfully. Odds are you've never seen this 200 before, otherwise known as an HTTP status code, but you've probably seen 404, file not found, maybe some others. Well, this is where those numbers come from. Well, there you have it, HTTP. My name is David Malin, and this is CS50.